what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Cowboys Beat podcast for July 30th, 2024. On today's episode, I brought in somebody that has a little bit of a different opinion to what a lot of Cowboys fans believe in a certain topic that we're going to talk about. We're going to be discussing, is Dak Prescott a top 10 quarterback? But before we get into the topic, undisputed world champ, introduce yourself, my friend.
Yes, number one, man. It's an honor to be on your platform, man. I've been a fan for a long time, man, and it's an honor to be here. That's number one, man. Thank you for having me. We've did a lot of podcasts together on other platforms, but to be on Cowboys Beat is flat out an honor, man. Thank you. I salute you. Yes, I am the undisputed champ. I am on TikTok. We're up to 17,000 followers at this point in time, trying to get up there. We're on YouTube, Undisputed GOAT Podcast. Every Thursday, this Tuesday, we will be having a special about the NFL coming back. And I'm just happy to be here, man. It's an honor to be here, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about it. So now I want you to explain your stance just on the Cowboys in general. Try to kind of give people a clearer picture of where you're coming at when it comes to just your overall opinion on the team.
Well, number one, I have to say this. I'll have to put this out there. People will say I am a Falcons fan, number one. Y'all have more Super Bowls. We know this already. Y'all have more notoriety. We know this already. But I watch you guys every single Sunday. Why? Because I'm a Cowboy. Because my mother's a Cowboys fan. So I have to watch the games with her in order to kind of soothe everything over. She's been a Cowboys fan since Starback. So, watching the games with her is kind of great. But I'm not a fan of the Cowboys. I watch them. So, yeah. So you could say I'm an in the closet fan because I have to watch them because of her. But yeah, and I'll just be very, very honest. Although I am not a Cowboys fan, it's great football when you guys are winning. It's great football. It's flat out theater. So it's to the Lakers winning.
Absolutely, which is why I'm like, why do people want this team to be bad so bad? Like I don't understand that. It's like when this team is good, it's much better for the sport. It's like if the Yankees are good, it's like if the Lakers are good. Part of the reason why I think the NBA is kind of, in this state of flux a little bit here is because the Lakers have been kind of mediocre. If they've been a team that has been on the top of the sport and has actually given ESPN and First Take and all these other debate shows something to talk about, I feel like the NBA would be in a much better spot right now. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I feel as though that way too. But on the flip side of that coin, Boston is winning as well. So as long as one of the flagship franchises are winning in the NFL or the NBA, eyeballs will follow. I think right now, there's never going to be a downside for viewers when it comes to football because everybody loves football. But it would be nice if we saw another Pittsburgh versus Dallas in the Super Bowl. And unfortunately for this era, outside of 1995, we never got a chance to see that once again. But I would most enjoy that, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I want you to just kind of walk Cowboys fans through is like, when I look at the top 10 quarterbacks in football, my question to people who believe Dak isn't in the top 10 is, what is the criteria? Because my thing is, this guy is a guy who was second in MVP voting this year, second in All-Pro. We all recognize him as a very nice talent at the quarterback position, on top of the fact that there's a lot of quarterbacks that people would put in the top 10 that haven't really won anything either. So kind of try and walk us through that, because I struggle understanding why people can't at the very least say that Dak is at least the 10th best quarterback in football, let alone him being ranked higher.
Well, to be honest with you, if you look at all of the other players that people put in the top 10, he's been in there a little bit longer. He's been in the league since 2016. And when you really look at it, hey, when you're in Dallas, you have to win. You have to win. People don't understand. This goes all the way back to Bob Meredith when he was playing quarterback, Mr. Cowboy himself. And you have to understand this. When you're in the league for 8 years and you have a 2-5 playoff record, it's going to play a psyche in the minds of a little bit of everyone because, hey, you're already in Dallas. The spotlight is already on you and you have a 2-5 record. Well, not to mention, people are talking about Caleb Williams right about now. That came in when his first year, you had Zeke Elliott, who led the league in rushing. You had Jason Witten, who was a Hall of Famer, and you had Dez Bryant, and you had an all-pro hellified offensive line. They talk about their Philadelphia Eagles offensive line. I'll put that Dallas Cowboy offensive line up against that almost any day. The only thing that you guys didn't have was a Jason Kelce. So when you add that up and you had a good thing all of this time, that is the reason why a lot of people are not anxious to put him in those conversations. When you look at his body of work, yes, the stats are there, but the playoff wins are not there. And when you look at a lot of other players, people will say, oh, yeah, well, you can have an excuse of, hey, he didn't have a top 10 defense. His defense kind of sold him during the season. His defense was up and down. Out of every year Dak has been in the NFL, 2016, 17, 18, 21, 22, and 23, the defense has not been ranked no less than 11. The only time that his offense was ranked outside of the top 10 was in 2017. And we all understand probably because he was hurt that year. But when you have top offenses and top defenses and Hall of Fame caliber players, that's why a lot of guys, a lot of commentators, and a lot of sports personalities, including myself, hold his feet to the fire like that. Because the thing is, especially when you think about the number one receivers that he had, when you think about Dez Bryant, when you think about Jason Witten, when you think about Amari Cooper, when you think about an all-generational player in CeeDee Lamb who came from an otherworldly offense that nearly beat my Georgia Bulldogs in the national championship with Oklahoma. When you think about all of those weapons, and that's not even including Zeke that's in the backfield. That's not even including Zeke that led the league in rushing twice. When you think about all of that, and when you put that together, not a lot of those quarterbacks that we see in top 10 rankings have those assets, has had those assets for a long period of time. I mean, you cannot, people always talk about Jerry Jones and how he's failing, the Dallas Cowboys. He's rotated. Talent has been at that skill position rotating for the last decade. If you really look at their drafts, it's top notch. If you look at the line, it's top notch. If you look at the receivers, it's top notch. The only thing I think that people are looking for Mr. Jones to do at this point in time is to do what the San Francisco 49ers are doing, which is go over the top, go for broke every single year. And I wouldn't blame him, because the thing is, the way I'm looking at it, I have an influx of talent in here every single year. How much talent do you need in order to win? And I think that's why people are anxious to put him outside of the top 10, because of the talent that has been infused in that team year after year after year. But yet we're seeing the underachievement. We're seeing one and dones in the playoffs. We're seeing you not go past the NFC, not get to an NFC championship. And the last quarterback that happened to was in the AFC, ironically, and that was Warren Moon. We saw him be on those Houston Oilers teams for many years to come with Givens and Christopher Duncan and guys of that nature, not to mention guys like Alonzo Highsmith. And you had, great running backs, great receivers, great offensive line, and you couldn't get to an in Warren Moon's case, an AFC championship. They're going to hold your feet to the fire when you are not getting it done that way. And if you really, really look at it, people are going to say, well, his stats are comparable to Patrick Mahomes. To those guys, I will say pump your brakes, because if you really look at it, Patrick Mahomes, every single year, a piece has been taken away. Every year, a piece has been taken away, and he's still putting up numbers. So for them to just take the easy way out and say stats, it's kind of lazy when you think about it.
Yeah. Okay. So do you have anything else to add to that?
Oh, no. Thank you.
Yeah. No problem. So like my problem with this whole thing is, do you believe that wins are a quarterback stat?
At times, because the thing is this, it's only so much that you can overcome. You can't overcome your defense. And we saw that and for people who are saying it is a quarterback stat, you can't overcome the terrible defense, because this past year, I don't really blame him for that one, because, the defense sold him on that one. They got ran through like hot knife through butter. So that one, now, although people are going to say because he played for the Cowboys, well, he threw 3 pick sixes. Yeah, just because he's trying to force balls in there where it really doesn't belong in order to try to make something happen. This past one, I don't blame him for. That one was surely on the defense. And I will be a pure biased person if I didn't say that. But as far as the other games are concerned, you were in the game, you had a chance to win. This one was by far the first one I could really say, well, that wasn't Dak's fault. That wasn't really Dak's fault. That was just, I mean, you can blame that a lot on the linebackers not being able to stop the run because Aaron Jones was really running through those guys, and it was quite disgusting if you really want me to be honest with you. So this past playoff win, I don't put that on Dak. So if you really want me to be honest about it, I don't add that to his resume. But it's really not a QB stat; it's a team stat. But at the same time, you as a quarterback have to put. We've seen it happen where your team gets down at a certain point, a lot of points. We saw it in the Super Bowl when Tom Brady played against my Atlanta Falcons. We saw Peyton Manning when he came back from a 30-point deficit. We saw it with Frank Reich when he came back against the Houston Oilers in the wild card round back in '93. Hey, sometimes when the chips are against the ground and your back's against the wall, sometimes you have to be that quarterback in order to dig your team out. And sometimes he can show us that. He show us a lot of promise, but we don't really get the full package with him. And if I may add more, the last quarterback that had everything that he had that played for the Dallas Cowboys won 3 Super Bowls. And that was a guy by the name of Troy Aikman.
Oh, no, I'm not letting you go there. No.
What you mean?
This team is not – the teams that he had were not nearly as good as the teams that Troy Aikman had. Those teams, if you take Troy Aikman off that team, are some of the best teams, even with Troy Aikman on the team. Yeah. I mean, that was some of the best teams that you could put out there. I mean, you had guys all over the field on both sides of the field. I can't. No. Because here's the thing. Like, my thing is with you're bringing up the defenses and how they performed over the course of his career. My question to you is this: should the defense not perform in the playoffs? Because I mean, if you look at we brought up the Packers game. You gave him a reason there as to why they lost that game.
They sold him that game. I don't blame that game on Dak at all.
I would say back in 2019, that game versus the Rams, Dak played good enough to win that game. They went into LA. That was a road game. He played well enough to win that game. But the problem was they gave up 275 yards on the ground. Ezekiel Elliott was really bad that game. I mean, I think he had 25 carries for 55 yards or something like that.
Yeah.
Dak, I would say, was the lone bright spot on the team that game. And the team around him, I hear what you're saying about like the names and the talent that they have around him. My pushback would be like, hey, they have to perform as well. Like, just because these guys have proven that they can perform in the regular season when it comes to those players, they have to perform as well. Now, if you want to criticize them for the 49ers game back in 2023, because I go by like this past playoffs was 2024 because it took place in 2024. That's some people kind of get confused when I bring that up. In the 49ers game in 2023, Dak did not play well. He was a part of the reason why they lost that game. But I would also say, like, hey, Tony Pollard went out in the first half. And after that, it was kind of just, there really wasn't anything going. There really wasn't there really wasn't 2 dimensions to their offense. It was one-dimensional. They ran Ezekiel Elliott far too often against the defense that it's just like, hey, man, you need to be creative here, and you have to have the Jimmies and Joes because they have the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes over in San Francisco. Yeah. But, 2016, I mean, Dak played well that game, and he was a 4th-round rookie. Like, he wasn't a top 5 pick or anything. He wasn't getting paid big money in that game in 2016. Now, I'm not trying to excuse Dak in the playoff performances. He needs to perform better. I'm not going to sit here and say that anything different. But my thing is, like, when you look, because I go by talent, because my problem with a lot of these top 10 lists that people put forward is that there's no criteria behind their lists. So my criteria is who is the best quarterbacks in the league, who plays the position at the highest of levels. And when you look at it, here's my list. I'll give you my list. I got my criteria. Actually, I'll give you my criteria. Yeah. Consistency is big with me because I've seen plenty of times watching the NFL where a quarterback is good for a year or two and then they just completely dwindle off into the sunset and to never be heard of again or to never play at a high level again. We've seen that plenty of times. So consistency is big with me. All the quarterback traits, arm talent, ability to read defenses, arm strength, arm talent, or accuracy, all of those traits mean something to me. So like when you look at that, I can tell you that Dak is a top 10 quarterback, because if that's my criteria and I'm staying consistent to my criteria, my top 10 list would be, I go Mahomes, Allen. People might not like this one, but I got Herbert third. I got Burrow fourth. I have Stafford fifth. I have Lamar sixth. I have Dak seventh. I have CJ Stroud eighth. I have Trevor Lawrence ninth. And then I have Jalen Hurts 10th. The reason why I have CJ Stroud below Dak is CJ Stroud played this year as well, and he was not an MVP candidate. There was a part of the season where people were having certain discussions about that, and I'm not holding that against him. He had a tremendous rookie season. But when you're comparing him to a quarterback who is in the MVP conversation, I'm going to hold that against him. CJ Stroud wasn't a second-team All-Pro. Now, is the future bright for CJ Stroud? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If I'm starting a team, would I start a team around CJ Stroud over Dak? Absolutely, because he's 8 years younger than Dak. And yeah, I can see the potential of him being a better quarterback than Dak. But at the current moment, I'm still going to take Dak over CJ Stroud because I have to stay consistent with my criteria, and that consistency thing is really big with me. Now, again, Dak's not going to be able to escape the playoff record at the current moment. But again, like I just feel like people could say, hey, well, Jalen Hurts is a top 10 quarterback. Okay, well, Jalen Hurts is 0-3 in playoff games when his defense doesn't give up more than 7 points. So like there's certain things like that to where I push back on people and certain playoff performances and playoff records. And I just say, yeah, but you can kind of pick in and dive in. Like Joe Burrow, his Super Bowl run. Joe Burrow didn't play that great in that Super Bowl run. I mean, the Tennessee Titans that year in that divisional round game, Tannehill turned the ball over, 3 times?
Yeah.
And the Bengals barely eked out that win. Joe Burrow didn't play exceptional in that game. I mean, he did his job. The AFC Championship game, I didn't walk away from that game saying Burrow was phenomenal in that game. Defense played well. It was a mixture of the Chiefs playing very poorly and kind of Joe Burrow just doing what he had to do. But again, it's not anything that I write home about and say, you had to see this performance. And that's kind of, I think I'm getting a little bit lost here, but that's where I get into it. And I just say like, hey, the playoff performances and the playoff records, I get it, but people aren't really winning around the league. And not only that, like, I kind of feel like the Cowboys' talent has been overrated over Dak's career. Like I really have. Like you brought up that the line has always been good. The line hasn't always been good. That's not true. The Cowboys won 12 games back in 2022, and Tyron Smith didn't take a single snap at left tackle. They were the 31st. They were the 31st ranked pass block win rate in the league. This past season, the offensive line was not that good this year. Like, sure, they had big names and they had certain accomplishments, but I think as a unit, as a whole, I didn't really think the offensive line played that well. I think there were good individual performers, but as an offensive line, there's more to that than just unit. Yeah, it's a unit. Like I would go back to 2019 with Tyron Smith missing games, and Tyron Smith has been in and out of the lineup pretty much Dak's entire career. Travis Frederick retired back in 2019. He hasn't had like a legitimate dominant center ever since then. So the wide receiver room. Like the wide receiver room in 2021 was very good. The wide receiver room in 2020 was very good as well. But Dak only played like 4 games that year. You go to 2022, it was CeeDee Lamb, Noah Brown, Michael Gallup coming off the ACL. Like that's not a great receiver room. Even this past year, like CeeDee Lamb, like Brandon Cooks is a good receiver, but I'm not going to look at him and say like you have to worry about him to the level of like the Eagles with Devontae Smith, where it's like, oh, dude, this guy is a legitimate number 1 receiver if he's not on this team. Like, I didn't look at it like that. And then like you go back to that year where they made the playoffs back in 2018, 2019, they had to trade a first-round pick for Amari Cooper because of how poorly their receivers were playing. Like Ezekiel Elliott, ever since 2019, Dak hasn't really had a legit run game to lean on. Like Ezekiel Elliott has played good in spots over the course of the past few seasons, but he hasn't been like our consistent, reliable running back for them. So that's where I kind of just look at it and say, like, I get that people get enamored by the names that the Cowboys have had, but at the same time, they have to perform better in the playoffs. On top of the fact that, like, I don't think the teams were as great as people are telling me they were.
Yeah, and I hate to say this, but I put a lot of that on the coaching that Mr. Jones brings in. I have to, because the thing is, I don't think that he likes strong-minded coaches. I really don't. I really think Coach Johnson gave him a headache back in the early days because of how strong-minded that he was. And I think if he would have gave Coach Parcells a good run at it and not intervene like he said that he wasn't going to do, I think that Bill Parcells would have kind of led him to the promised land, because Dallas is the glamour town. It's kind of like Los Angeles. I mean, you have to save your team away from themselves. I mean, there's a lot of guys that's dedicated, as you saw with the Great Wall of Dallas back in the day. But the thing is, you do have some of those guys that will get distracted. I mean, and that's especially important during the off season, in order to keep guys in check. But I don't think that the coaching has been strong-minded enough for these talents to be maximized as well. Because when you think about it, I just have to say that Mike McCarthy is the first coach that I've seen since, I think, Chan Gailey, that was hired outside the Dallas Cowboy Club at a certain point, hired outside the family. I think, Jason Garrett, we all know that was a family hire because, his ties back to the Super Bowl and him in his playing days. And I think that once you bring in a strong-minded enough coach in order to bring those guys up into a level, then I think it will turn itself around. I wouldn't have minded if he brought in Bill Belichick this year. I wouldn't have minded. Now, I would have been interested to see how they would have, meshed together at a certain point, But I don't think that Mr. Jones has hired a strong enough minded coach in order to bring these talents. Because, like I said, you have the names, you have the talent, but can you imagine a Micah Parsons? I can never say his name right. Can you imagine a Micah Parsons with a Bill Belichick in that system? Can you imagine him with Lawrence as well? But I think, one thing that has been lacking, or another reason why, is because of coaching. And I think that after this year, I think that Mr. Jones going to go for broke after this year, because it's like, hey, I don't have anything to lose at this point, because, what's the worst that can happen? I win a Super Bowl, especially in this division. And because when you look at this division, the only constant outside of Dak right now, I will say right now, I do stress right now, is Jalen Hurts. That's the only constant. When you look at the East, I don't really see the Commanders doing anything anytime soon. I mean, when you really look at the New York Giants, yes, that defensive line and that defense is getting better, but without Saquon, what are you going to do? So, I mean, after this year, it should be interesting to see what's going to happen, especially if you can get the big three signed. If you get the big three signed, that being Dak, CeeDee Lamb, and Parsons, if you get those three signed, it's going to be on. But if it's all going to depend on what coach, because I think Mike McCarthy, and I was guilty of this. I was guilty of overrating him at a certain point, because everybody looked at it, and how I looked at it as well. Okay, he came into this team and took over with Brett Favre, and they had some of their best seasons, and he won a Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers, and they was winning MVPs, just reeling them off. Well, little did I realize, it's like, yeah, those quarterbacks were talented, and they were otherworldly talent. And, versus, and like I said, not selling anything from Dak, but, you have to understand and put it in perspective. Those guys were up there as far as being all-time greats. But I think coaching plays a role in that too. And it's going to be interesting to see if they bring in Bill Belichick next year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I would be very surprised if they do. I really would be. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I know we're kind of diverting from the Dak conversation, which, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. It's sports.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out this year in Dallas, because I look at this team and I think Dak has entered that phase of his career to where they're going to be a team that wins a lot of games every single year. Like, with the talent that they have on this team, they still have plenty of talent on this team to compete for the division, for sure compete for a wild card spot. It's going to be interesting to see how their season plays out. But man, like if they hit on some of these young players they have on their squad, like Guyton, some of these second year guys that they have coming back, and I feel like under Mike Zimmer with this defense, this is a team that can make some noise, but it's just so hard to get a gauge on them because you're relying on things that you haven't seen yet. So it's interesting. I don't understand the takes where people are coming from where they're like, they're going to miss the playoffs. But, I guarantee you 4 months from now, they're going to be the same people that say, well, they have no excuses this year. So it's interesting to see how that's going to play out.
I think I'm just going to be very, very honest. And like I said, keep in mind, everybody who's watching at this point, I am a Falcons fan. I am not a Cowboys fan. But if you really look at the NFC at this point, there's really only 4 teams: 49ers, Eagles, Dallas, the Lions. That's it. Because you got to ask yourself, a lot of these quarterbacks this offseason has gotten paid off potential. We don't really know what Jordan Love is. We don't.
Yeah.
If you really look at the NFC North, I mean, you think about it. Caleb Williams, we don't know what he's going to be on the pro level. Sam Darnold, if he starts, although they have a good offensive line up there, they got 2 good left tackles up there in Minnesota. We don't know what they're going to be, even with Justin Jefferson. And when you think about, what's the last team?
Is it the Packers?
The Packers, the Bears.
Hit on them. Packers, Bears, Vikings, Falcons? Is it the Falcons?
No. And the Lions, but I already said the Lions. It's really a 4-man race. But outside of those 4 teams, you're really looking at potential. When you think about the Lions, when you think about the Bears, potential. When you think about even my Atlanta Falcons, potential. You're thinking about what they could potentially be. So for people who are, like I said, I'm not a Cowboys fan. I'm a Falcons fan. But the thing is, for people who are saying, well, they're not going to make the playoffs, that's just pure Dallas hate. And you kind of get tired of seeing it. It's kind of fatiguing at a certain point. Everybody knows that Dallas is the team that everybody loves to hate because they're the glamour team. Like I said, it's kind of like the Lakers in the NBA. But for people saying that they're not going to make the playoffs, like I said, a lot of these teams, if they were in the AFC, that would be another story. But fortunately for them, they're in the NFC. And when you look at the NFC, it's a 4-man race. It's like Dallas, Philadelphia, San Francisco, then the Lions. Everybody else is like, okay, who's going to come out? Can Matthew Stafford do it again, or is he on the dark side? Can Baker Mayfield do it again, or is this just a fluke? Is Kirk Cousins going to come out and turn out like we think he is in Atlanta with all of those weapons that we've provided for him with Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and that offensive line and that defense with Jesse Bates? A lot of these teams in the NFC outside of those 4 are really just kind of, okay, you're holding your collective breath and saying, hey, they have the potential, but are they going to fulfill it? And for people saying that they're not going to even make the playoffs, it's kind of like I said, it's just Cowboy hate, man.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's my thing. Like, I'm cool if people want to hold, the Cowboys to a certain standard, but I also don't want people to come to me and say they have no excuses if they don't win the Super Bowl this year. But it's like, all right, 3-4 months earlier, you were telling me how there were so many problems with this team and the sky was falling down. That's my problem. It's like, you're being fair. So if you were to come to me 4 months from now and say, hey, they got to get it done this year, they have no excuses, I would be like, all right, yeah, that's fair. I completely agree with that. Now, if somebody wants to come up to me and say, hey, I was wrong about this team, and they completely proved me wrong and they exceeded my expectations. Now, this is how I think of the team. They have to get it done. Then again, I'd say, okay, that's fair. But it's the people that really drive me up a wall that say, oh, well, they're not going to make the playoffs, because in the offseason, people could talk as crazy as they want, and they're not being held accountable because there's not a game on Sunday, which is why I hate offseason trash talk so much. Like you see it between Cowboys fans and Eagles fans right now, and it's like, yo, shut up. We both lost in embarrassing fashion. Both of our seasons ended in embarrassing fashion. Shut up. So that's kind of where I come from with that. So, yeah. And any closing thoughts before we head out here?
To be honest with you, man, look, hey, y'all will make the playoffs. I will say Dallas will make the playoffs. You can quote me right here. Like I said, a Falcons fan is saying that Dallas will make the playoffs. So for anybody who said that, it's just pure Cowboy hate. One other thing that I see that Dallas needs to do is there's a lot of Darren Sproles-esque that I see in Deuce Vaughn. I want to see you use him, man. Use him. Like I said, I watch this team. Like I said, it's fun when the Dallas Cowboys win it. I just grew up a Falcons fan. But use Deuce Vaughn. He has so much potential. Don't just use him for 2 yards in a cloud of dust and stop using him. Use him like you know you can. Hey, he's a tweener. He can be a Maurice Jones-Drew, or a Darren Sproles, depending on how you use him. And in a pass-happy offense like Mike McCarthy's, you can definitely utilize him in a million different ways. But the thing is this: if Mike McCarthy wants this team to succeed, he has to find a way to use Deuce Vaughn or some of those other backs that he has. Those are my closing thoughts. I think that the running game, although he wants to pass the ball, is going to be integral, because I don't know how much gas Zeke has left or if he's on fumes at this point, but give these other backs a chance to shine so you can take a little bit of pressure off that passing game. You can't throw 500 times a damn season and expect, to go to Super Bowls. The run and shoot wasn't working back then, and it ain't working now. So,
yeah, one thing I want to add to that Deuce Vaughn thing is, like, I think a lot of people forget with Darren Sproles, when it comes to his yardage output, he was a more productive receiver than he was running back. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. There's a level of creativity that has to be presented for a guy like Deuce Vaughn. He's not a guy that's just, hey, let's line him up and run him through A gap 20 times a game. Like, no, you're not going to get the most out of him. You got to use him in screen plays, swing passes, get him out in space, outside zone, tosses, all that type of stuff to get him out in space and let his superpower be at its forefront, which is, hey, when this guy gets out in space, good luck tackling this guy. So I'm happy that you decided to add that for your closing thought, because it is a very interesting discussion. So one more time, let them know where they can find you at.
Undisputed World Champ on TikTok. We're up to 17,000, man. Also, Undisputed GOAT. Tomorrow is our NFL is back special show coming on at 9:00.
It might be tonight when this thing's dropping. We're dropping it on Tuesday, so it'll be tonight.
Right. So, so that'll be the pinnacle. Football is back show tomorrow at 9. So look at that. Also check out PSP's podcast, Brandon from the Block, and all those guys. Those guys are great guys, and you should check them out as well. You see me on all of their shows. Shout out to every last one of those guys, and you, Cowboy Beat, in order for me to have a voice on your platform. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on, my friend. I'll see you later. And for anybody watching this, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next episode.